Good evening, Mid-Manhattan Library. My name is Ari Rest, and I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's author talk, The Death of Expertise, a campaign against established knowledge and why it matters. Please take this time to silence your cell phones. If you do take any pictures, please tag the library on social media. We live in the information age. With a few taps on a pocket-sized screen, anyone can look up basically anything, and many of them consider themselves experts in every field, even ones they've never spent any amount of time seriously studying. When everyone thinks of themselves as an expert, their opinions become inflated, and even evidence presented against those opinions by actual experts in the field cannot dissuade them. A need for content has brought these self-proclaimed experts into our living rooms, as the 24-hour news channels give them at least as much time as actual experts. Back in March, I presented in the Computers in Library Conference in DC. There were a lot of talks and panels on the fake news problem and what to do about it. Perhaps not coincidentally, when I asked around for my What Are You Reading blog, the first attendee I asked said he was reading tonight's book. The Death of Expertise is Thomas Nichols' seventh. He is a professor at the Naval War College, the Harvard Extension School, a senior associate of the Carnegie Council on Ethics and International Affairs, and a fellow of the International History Institute of the Boston University. He's also a 5-time undefeated Jeopardy champion and Hall of Famer. Please welcome Thomas Nichols.
Thank you so much for having me here, and thanks for coming out. You know, it's a July day and downtown and after a work day, so I really appreciate all of you taking the time to come and listen to hear this. First thing I'd say is nothing I say represents the views of the Navy, the Naval War College, U.S. government, my wife, my cat, nobody but me. So these are all my personal views. The first question, a lot of folks ask me about is why would you do this? Why would you write such an, this book with such an inflammatory title, with this obnoxious subtitle of, people ask me things like, oh, what were the other titles? Everyone is stupid but me, shut up and listen to me. We really debated what to call this because what I'm really trying to capture is a kind of a larger problem of a breakdown of social trust, people not trusting institutions, which is actually an old problem in the United States, but people really not trusting the division of labor even among each other. And so we called it the death of expertise, but am I overselling that case? Because we all know expertise isn't dead. We all know experts, doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, excuse me. And really, how new is any of this? I have because my particular beat is national security, people ask me, what does this have to do with national security? Why would you even write this? Well, it's not new in the sense that people have always had a mistrust of intellectuals. That's actually, I think, a very positive part of American culture that goes back a long way. We don't automatically, we're not old Europe, to steal a phrase from Donald Rumsfeld. We don't automatically trust people who have multiple degrees. We don't use titles. We don't call each other Herr Doctor, Professor. Teachers don't walk around in their black Oxford robes. We're more egalitarian culture than that. And I think that's actually a very good thing. What's different now, and I would say by now I mean in the last 30 to 40 years, is that people are no longer just distrustful or skeptical of intellectuals or eggheads or experts. They actually think they're smarter than experts. That's the part that's really scary. It's not that people say, look, I don't trust lawyers. I mean, who trusts lawyers, right? But people now say, I know more than lawyers. I know more than doctors. And in my own experience, when I go back to why did I write this, let me just say, no matter how it may seem or how many times people ask me this, it had nothing to do with the election. I started writing this years ago. The first piece I ever wrote about this appeared in late 2013, before anything else was going on in the world. But what did spur it was a discussion about national security, where we were talking about the Edward Snowden business, and I said something about Russia. Now, I should tell you, I am a Russia expert. I've been doing it for 30 years. I speak Russian. I've been there dozens of times. I've written books about it. And someone arguing this with me finally said, Tom, I don't think you really understand this problem. Let me explain Russia to you. And I said, no. No, you will not. And I sat down that evening and I said, when did this happen? Because it had been increasing over time, and I'd heard other people telling the same stories, and I kind of fired off this angry blog piece. And then I took my blog down recently because I said, you know, blogs are part of the problem, and I can't be part of the problem. But before that happened, a conservative magazine, a new conservative magazine at the time of ideas and culture, said, hey, we're looking for content, we came across this, we saw your thing, can we have it? And I said, sure, you can have it. It's just, you know, old man yelling at clouds, so go ahead and take it. And the thing took off. Within about a year, over 1 million people had read it around the world. We knew this from the traffic on the blog. Not hits, but individual visitors. And I started getting letters from all over the world. I started getting letters from Asia, from Australia, from Europe, scientists, teachers, diplomats, retired experts in various fields. And as of this point, the book's only been out for about 3 months, and it's already set, publishers have already picked it up to translate it into Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and Finnish. So clearly there's something going on around the world that I thought may just be an American thing, but now turns out to be more of a developed world problem. So that's the genesis of the book. What I'll do next is I'll kind of lay out the main arguments in the book, and I'm not going to talk at you for the next 2 hours because no one should do that. And then I'll stop and be happy to take your questions. So how did this happen? Well, I lay out primarily three, there's a lot of reasons for it. I would say the underlying reason for a lot of our social problems, including the death of expertise, is the growth of unrestrained narcissism in American culture. I think narcissism is at the root of a lot of our problems, of people who, I call it, for those of you who've seen The Godfather, I call it Fredo-nation. I'm smart, I can do things, and I think there was once a time where people would accept, look, I may be good at my job, but I'm not good at everything. I may know a few things, but I don't know everything. And I think that time has now morphed into a time where people say, you know, my personal fulfillment, my sense of myself is the most important thing in the world. And I think that's partly what's poisoning our social life and our politics. Within that, I tried to identify 3 separate influences. And I tried to stick to things that I had the most experience with. Certainly with higher education, where, as I say in the book, students are now treated like clients. And you can't flunk the customers. Students, I say in the book that college should be a very uncomfortable experience. And it was in ways for me. Now, let me just say, I loved college, I had a great time at school, but it was a big transition for me, as at least one of my old friends, I just realized there's an old friend here, went to the same high school. We come from, you know, a blue-collar, working-class town. I mean, our high school was what it was, and going to college was a place where I had to confront a lot of different people from different parts of the world and ideas that were alien to me, and it's supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be your happy place. It's supposed to take you out of your happy place. It's supposed to help you get past childhood and adolescence. And I tell a story in the book about a Jesuit professor I had. I'm not Catholic, but I'll never mess with Jesuit professors again after this story. He was one of my favorite teachers in the end. He started his class by handing out an essay called What a Student Owes a Teacher. Can you imagine doing that today? Handing out an essay that says, here's what you owe me, including trust, docility, effort. And of course, I was a young grad student. I'd just gotten a fellowship to go to grad school, and I thought I was pretty smart. And I read this, and I said, wow, this guy you know, is really something else. And yet, you know, he turned out to be a great teacher. So the story I don't tell in the book is that we need more of this kind of teaching. I walked up to him after I got an A in the class. I thought I was the smartest guy. You know, I'd beaten this 50-ish, you know, buzz-cut, steel-grayed haired Jesuit with his black horn-rimmed glasses. And I walked up at the Christmas party at Georgetown, and I said, Merry Christmas, Father. What do you say? Peace on earth, goodwill towards men? And you know, because I got an A in his class, and he just looked at me for a moment over his glasses, and he said, what I say to you, Mr. Nichols, is repent. And I think, you know, every student should have that experience. I I remember one of my favorite teachers who's still, to this day, one of my teachers. He's still around, and I still see him, and I still seek his advice after 40 years. He gave me an A on a paper, and he said, this was, and give me this paper, an A, and he said, and then he wrote under it, but don't take that to mean without flaws, they're quite evident. Now again, imagine doing some of this stuff, that was 40 years ago, and I said, wow, I can't just try and get a better grade. I need this guy to tell me I'm doing something good, and I think that that's been lost. I think that now colleges market themselves, not all, look, I still think American universities are the best in the world. Let me just say that straight up. But I think that in the competition for the bottomless supply of loan dollars, colleges now market themselves as multi-year vacation packages, where you will be happy and you will be comfortable. In the book, I talk about the event at Yale where in the great Halloween costume massacre of 2016, 2015, where these kids all started yelling at the professors about their cultural insensitivity. And this young woman starts dropping F-bombs on one of the Yale faculty saying, this is not an intellectual space. Your job, this is the student telling the professor, she said, your job is to create a home here. Now, whoever convinced that student of this has done her a great disservice in her life. Because college is not a home. College is not some luxury condo rented 9 months at a time. College is, in fact, an intellectual free fire zone where you learn to become an adult. And I think that this hardens people, because this is not just a gripe about old conservative complaints about kids these days. It leaves young people with the problem that they leave college thinking they already know everything they need to know because they knew it when they came in, and because they're used to dismissing the process of education, they're resistant to further education. College, any kind of higher education, high school, college, should make you a lifelong learner. And I would argue that a lot of the way that college is done today makes you actually the opposite of that. It makes you very resistant to further learning once you get out. Media and talk radio have been a part of this, especially since I just had a conversation with a reporter today. It was very interesting, kind of back and forth, because I said, look, stop giving the people what they want. Tell them what they need. And he said journalists feel that that's very much their mission, is to give people what they need. He says, but on the other hand, we're all niche publications now, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book. Those of us of a certain age, a few of us out here, we remember a time when the news was a half an hour, curated mostly right here in New York City. Was that a better time? Probably not. I think younger critics of that kind of media would say that that was the corporate-sponsored view of old white guys in New York, and they have a point. On the other hand, the corporate view of old white guys in New York did think that in that half hour, an arms control treaty was more important than which Kardashian is sleeping with whom. And I think that was important as well. We've somehow overcorrected in the other direction, where now every news outlet, because of the huge availability of bandwidth, every media operation is a niche operation. So instead of telling you what you need to know in a kind of balanced meal, I often talk about information like it's food. Talk about a lot of things like they're food, as you can see. But instead of giving you a balanced meal, they put out a kind of lazy Susan of junk food and say, just pick from it, whatever you like. And that is a huge indulgence of confirmation bias, because then you just cherry pick from channel to channel, from story to story. Think of it this way. People don't read a newspaper anymore. They search for news stories with keywords. And this, again, for folks of a certain age, you'll understand why this bombed in class. I made a reference in class the other day to a bunch of younger students, my summer students. And I made a reference to an above-the-fold story. And they kind of looked at me like, how do you fold an iPad? And I said, well, okay, so newspapers used to be made out of dead trees and above the fold, and I said, there's no visual marker for that anymore. If you want to know about the summit with Putin, you don't sit down with the New York Times. Some of you do, obviously, but most people now don't sit down with the New York Times and look at it and say, okay, where's the important story? Where's the analysis? Where's the opinion? They go to a computer and they say, Trump, Russia, G20, Germany, whatever, and then they get whatever that algorithm barfs up, which may or may not be news. And then you can go through and kind of pick which ones you want to look at. The equivalent would be reading a book by starting with the index instead of starting with page 1. And just looking for the things that already interest you. I think that's really dangerous. Finally, we can certainly talk about media more. There are a couple. I actually am a partisan on behalf of journalists because I know a lot of journalists from far right to far left, and I would say overwhelmingly that 99% of journalists really do try and get it right. They're human beings, they screw up, their bias creeps in, they make mistakes, but nothing makes me angrier than the term fake news. Because as a Russia expert, let me tell you, there is such a thing as fake news. Fake news is stuff that's created whole cloth, usually in an intelligence agency or by professional propagandists, and then seeded into the blogosphere or the information space intentionally to paralyze and mislead people. Fake news is not news that you don't like, or spin you don't approve of, or a reporter who happened to annoy you, or an error that was later corrected. None of that is fake news. And the president uses that term all the time, and it makes me crazy. Fake news is intentionally a whole cloth falsehood that is planted out there like a decoy to mess with your head. Finally, my typing cat, one of my favorite internet memes. I'm a cat guy. I don't know, I'm going to lose half the room right there by saying that, I guess. But, the influence of the internet. I leave the internet for last because when I first started talking about this, I said, well, I'm talking about the death of expertise and people challenging experts. Instantly, even other professionals would say, well, you mean the internet. It's the internet. Doctors, as I point out in the book, doctors have this great expression, paging Dr. Google, that they use among themselves. So how's it going with that patient? Oh, she's in there paging Dr. Google. I think the internet took a pre-existing problem and put it on steroids, to keep using a medical term, but really put it on high octane by taking people's in this growing narcissism and distrust of experts and allowing people to remove themselves from any social interaction. Go look on the internet to find the one person in the world who probably agrees with them and then say, aha, I am smarter than an expert. And it's highly destructive. I mean, I went through phases. Some of you probably follow me on Twitter. If you don't, I'm at Radio Free Tom. And I go through phases where I do nothing but just blow up urban legends and fake stories for a couple hours every few weeks, just because people just put them out there uncritically. I don't do it on Facebook anymore because it always hurts to do it to your friends. Somebody says, Tom, have you seen this? And I say, all right, I know we play golf together and you're a great guy, but you're spreading BS. No, it's true. No, it's not. And that's a real problem, is that people think that by going to the internet, here's an interesting factoid that has come up in research over the years. Increasingly, people tend to believe that whatever the first 5 or 10 results of a search are true. That priority in a search result actually convinces people of authenticity. Think of how scary that is. This is one of the reasons that Google had to start labeling things with that little ad warning. Because you can just mess with the algorithm and you'll say, oh, let's see, Obama, Kenya. Oh, my goodness, he really was born in Africa. Because it'll just come up. Children especially, this is actually changing our brains. Children who've been, researchers, I talk about a study in the book at the University College of London, University of City of London, where children, it shows how they now don't read, that they will scan, that they are uncritically accepting whatever they're scanning in front of them. Yale did a study that added to that said that people no longer, when they spend enough time looking at something on the internet, they can no longer tell the difference between inherent knowledge and acquired knowledge. In other words, they click through a lot of pages and then say, oh yeah, I already knew about that stuff. Not realizing that it's just like putting like sediment in their brains of little pieces of pages, and then they say, yeah, I didn't find that out on the internet, I knew it already. That's really dangerous. because it convinces you that if you see something enough times, it's true. And this click and scan and click and scan is really, I sound like I'm talking, again about your dad. It's really bad for you. It rots your teeth. And I fall prey to it. Everybody does. Anybody who uses the internet, a few times I've gotten burned where I've clicked on something. I say, oh, here's an interesting story, and then someone says, no, hey, expert guy, that one was wrong. And even I've stepped on that mousetrap a few times. But I'm not quite sure what to do about it, but we can talk about that in a bit. So who's an expert? And this word I'm throwing around, experts. This is how we see ourselves. This is how the public sees us. That expert has become a pejorative. Even before the 2016 election, where expert was thrown out as an insult, in the Brexit campaign, the exit from the UK, EU people were saying things like, we've all had enough of experts. Experts have screwed things up. But experts becomes this kind of blanket word for anybody that seems to have an education or is in a powerful position. I try to be a little more specific in the book. I talk about education, certainly that's important. But I don't think that just having credentials is the mark of an expert. I will gladly agree with people who quickly point out that there's a lot of really stupid people in the world that have college degrees, and graduate degrees, and PhDs. Training, if you're not in information or educational or intellectual work, training is a mark of expertise. How do you become a master electrician? Other electricians teach you and eventually certify you. How do you become a registered nurse? That you are trained to do things. How do you become a senior member of the military, enlisted or officer? That you have a lot of training, you have a lot of background, and you have a lot of longevity in that field. That peer review is really important, whether it's electricians or plumbers, looking over the shoulders of others that they're about to certify, or authors. This book had to pass muster with, one of the peer reviewers stepped forward recently and told me who he was. To this day, I still don't know who the people were that said it was okay to publish this book. And that's how it ought to be. That's actually a really good thing. That peer affirmation is important because I think, yes, it can turn into guild behavior. Yes, it can turn into ass covering, and yes, it can turn into trying to sweep scandals under the rug. Doctors covering for doctors, teachers covering for teachers. By and large, though, one true sign of an expert is that you will find enough other experts out there who will affirm that, even when they disagree with him. The highest compliment I can give to another expert is usually to say something like, I don't agree with anything this guy just wrote, but you have to read this in order to be informed on this subject, even if I don't agree with it, because I recognize its quality. I recognize the quality of the research in it, and I think you should read it. To me, when people say, I don't agree with you, but I always read you, I love that. I don't ask people to agree with me. They say, you always make me think. That's all we can ask as an expert. We are not gods, we are not infallible, we're not always right. There's an entire chapter in the book called When Experts Are Wrong. We do all these terrible things. We do exactly everything that you other human beings do. We lie, we cheat, we steal, we kick our dogs, we park in handicap spaces when we're not supposed to. We are prone to all the human failings of fraud, falsification, inflating our credentials. But by and large, without the ability, there is no other way to keep track on experts without other experts keeping track of them and policing themselves as a profession. Again, whether it's cops to diplomats, people who understand the field you're in are the people who are best able to tell you whether this person's any good at what they're doing. And finally, there's experience. This is not, again, old man saying kids don't have enough experience. There are young people whose expertise is evident from the get-go. But in most fields, I would argue that another mark of expertise is longevity in a field. When I've encountered people who say things like, well, I used to be a lawyer, I did it for a couple of years, and then I quit. I wasn't enjoying. I say, I always think, were you any good at it? did you just not like it? I mean, there are people I've known, one of the worst teachers I ever had, I thought, this guy's not a good teacher. Well, 2 years later, he was gone because he wasn't a good teacher. Another teacher said, you're not good at this. So I think that a certain amount of ability to survive and thrive in an expert field is itself a mark of being an expert. That's not to say that the young doctor straight out of med school isn't a good doctor, or that the guy who's been a doctor for 35 years is great. But that's why, again, experienced professionals mentor less experienced professionals. And that's something to look for. All right, let me say a word about my own field here, national security. Because one place where people often push back on this whole paradigm is say, look, Tom, mathematicians, engineers, pilots, I get it. They're experts. I can't fly the plane. But politics, policy, national security, anybody can do that. Anybody who has a view on this can do it. And I say, no. It's no place for amateurs. When we get things wrong, especially in foreign policy, bad things can happen, like wars and people dying. And that's happened. When I started writing this book, people would throw what I call the holy trinity of expert failure at me. The three great cases that almost inevitably, so I'm writing a book about experts, and people would say, thalidomide, Vietnam, Challenger. Well, yeah, expert errors involved in all of them. Yet, Americans, 60 years after thalidomide, take 300,000 perfectly safe over-the-counter drugs. Vietnam, I would argue, was, we can talk about this more, talk about Iraq if you like, cases that in some ways make my point. How did Vietnam go wrong? Because experts weren't listened to. Because a guy who ran a car company became Secretary of Defense and said, well, I ran Ford, how hard can this be? People who've read the book, The Best and the Brightest, sometimes take away the wrong lesson from that. Generically bright people who are not experts on something can actually make terrible mistakes. And the experts involved in the Challenger failure have engaged in 30 years of self-examination and recrimination and trying to make sure that it never happens again. It's still kind of amazing that we've done this so many times now. I'm actually old enough that I'll say this. Think of the fact that we've been to the moon so many times. We stopped going there 45 years ago after we were done driving dune buggies and hitting golf balls off the moon. Inherently difficult things, but experts can fail at all of them. And sometimes we fail because of mistakes. Sometimes we fail because of hubris. We don't have perfect track records. In the end, though, I think the most dangerous thing, and I'm going to talk a bit more about national security, is that because your lives are involved, this isn't just setting marginal tax rates. This is life and death. This is war and peace. And my particular gripe here is that it's very difficult to have a conversation with the public that refuses to be informed enough to be critics of experts. And I say in the book, at the end and throughout, my client as a teacher, as a professional, is you, society. Yes, I get paid by the Naval War College. Yes, I get paid by Harvard Extension. But in the end, every professional's client is the society we live in. And I want people to be more engaged, more empowered, more involved. But as Harlan Ellison, I only came across this quote recently, I'm surprised. I start the book with the quote by Isaac Asimov about the cult of ignorance in America. But Harlan Ellison had a great comeback to someone who said, I have a right to my opinion. He said, no, you do not have a right to your opinion. You have a right to an informed opinion. No one has a right to an uninformed opinion. Let me give you a couple of examples before I turn the lights back up and we talk. Americans were asked what they thought about the situation in Ukraine a few years ago. They couldn't find it. It's right there. It's the biggest country entirely in Europe. You could have thrown a dart, and yet the average respondent was off by 1,800 miles, which means that there were people who couldn't put Ukraine on the right continent. And then it gets worse, because I've taken some flack about this, saying, somebody said to me, you experts with your map tests, you can't pass a map test. True enough, when the Rwanda genocide broke out, the Assistant Secretary of State, who later became Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, had to be shown where it was on a map. And so there's a genocide in Rwanda. And he said, oh, where is that? But the people who were least likely to know where Ukraine was had the strongest opinions about in favor of using military force there. In other words, the more ignorant you were about where Ukraine was actually located, the more likely you were to say, let's go in and kick some ass, even without realizing that you could potentially be talking about World War III. Republicans and Democrats polled some years ago by a liberal polling firm. They were trying to troll Republicans about how warlike Republicans are. And what they found out is that everybody's kind of dumb. Because Republicans, when asked if they would bomb, they believed in bombing Agrabah. Because of course, Agrabah has been a long-standing source of terrorist threats for quite a long time. And a fair number of Republicans were in favor of bombing Agrabah. And they said, see, there you go. But if you looked further into the poll, you found that a majority of Democrats were very much against bombing Agrabah. They felt that that was a very... There were more than half the people involved had a definite view, one way or the other, about bombing Agrabah. This, of course, is Agrabah, a country in a 1992 Disney cartoon, Aladdin. Very strong views on this. Finally, let's play pin the tail on Kim Jong-un. This is a map. Unfortunately, this lighting isn't great, but what you can see here is, this is a map from roughly the Caspian Sea out to the Pacific, up to Siberia, down to Australia. What are these little blue dots, you may ask? I'm colorblind. Blue? Aqua? These little dots, each dot represents the guess of an American adult about where North Korea is. Now, a couple of things about this. This involved both educated and college-educated and non-college-educated folks. In the end, only 36% of the respondents got it right. Now, what I find particularly galling about this map is this clustering right here of the people who were smart enough to know it's on the Korean Peninsula and then blew the 50-50 shot about whether North Korea was on the north side of the Korean Peninsula. So where does that leave us? I argue at the end of the book that this kind of rejection of expertise, especially when coupled with the very arrogant and unfounded notion that anyone can replace an expert, is actually very dangerous to our democracy. It's dangerous to your health. If you think you're smarter than your doctor and you don't need a vaccine, you're endangering yourself and you're endangering a lot of other people. And yes, I did give this talk in San Francisco and got a couple of raised eyebrows right in the middle of anti-vaccine heaven, but California, I think, actually did the right thing by saying, you know what, enough arguing about this, we're going to pass a law. But I think it's more dangerous to our civic culture overall, because we don't live in a direct democracy. We're not Athens. We don't gather in the public square once a day to figure out how big our budget ought to be. We are a representative democracy. We're a republic. We count on our elected officials to act on our behalf, even when we don't know what we're doing. Because none of us can master all these issues, and neither can your elected representatives. I was an aide to a U.S. Senator, John Hines of Pennsylvania, God rest his soul, great man. What congressmen and senators do is they do child care in the morning, they do arms control in the afternoon, and they do elderly issues at night. Nobody can keep up with this. They have to rely on experts. They need sources of expert opinion. And when the public says, look, don't listen to any of that stuff, just do the stuff we want, that's how you get situations where people want you to repeal Obamacare but keep the Affordable Care Act. Now, when you get mad at your elected representatives, again, I've spoken up for journalists of reviled class, and I'll speak up for politicians. It is impossible to reason with a public that wants completely contradictory things because they refuse to educate themselves enough to be able to make an informed choice. And in a republic, we have to make those choices every day. One of the other little facts I put in the book, we're having a debate now in the United States about cutting foreign aid. Everybody's in favor of cutting foreign aid. Finally, we can get all those welfare queen foreigners off our dime. Fact of the matter is, when you ask the average American how much of our budget is spent on foreign aid, the average person will give you an answer somewhere between 10 and 25% of the US budget. It's 3/4%. Now, how do you have a discussion about what's your congressman supposed to do when you say, hey, stop all that foreign aid? Because the other thing about foreign aid people don't realize, it's mostly given as stuff made by Americans. It's like a US citizens jobs program. We spend money to buy stuff from ourselves and then give it away. I'm not sure what to do about this, but when we go down this road, our elected representatives are paralyzed and actually start listening to us too much. I'm an old school Burkean conservative that way. People say, you know, people in Washington need to listen to us. And I say, the problem is they are listening to you. That's why things are screwed up. Because you're giving them 100 conflicting messages a day and they're trying to satisfy them all. And the only one that they know they can satisfy is send you more money. And so we spend money on stuff. I cut my teeth in politics in Massachusetts, which is, by the way, why those of you old enough to remember, one of the examples I use in my book is Cliff Clavin from Cheers. As I grew up around those guys. And, you know, when I would talk to people back when I was working in politics in the 80s in Boston, people would say, yeah, Washington's all screwed up. And I'd say, well, who'd you vote for president? And I'd say, Reagan. I said, who'd you vote for senator? And it's a Kennedy. I said, what'd you think was going to happen? They said, well, those guys should be able to work it out. I said, you've told them not to work it out. You sent them there to fight with each other. As George Will once said, if you don't like the way Washington works, take it up with James Madison, because it was set up to function this way. But as Madison says, and I quote him at the end of the book, people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with knowledge. And I put this, experts, I think, have failed in their willingness to engage the public. One of the reasons I'm standing here is because I think that's our job, it's our duty to engage with you. I think experts are pulling back because they'd rather talk to each other in unintelligible jargon than have these kinds of arguments with the public. But I still put the blame squarely on the shoulders of the public itself. The public has a positive obligation to stay informed enough to guide its own government, or else we are relinquishing control over our own destiny as a democracy. This building, this public library, is here as a pillar of representative democracy. Every time you walk into a building like this, you are becoming a better citizen by reading books and newspapers and periodicals. And if people aren't doing that, then our democracy is going to go one of two ways. Either toward mob rule, which I know that's kind of the fashionable outcome. That's fashionable to say that's our outcome now with Trump and populism and all that stuff. But I actually don't think that's likely, because populism is great for venting anger, but it's really lousy for delivering the mail and keeping the lights on. And in the end, people that all sputters out and people just want things to get done. I worry about it going the other way, which is that experts simply stop asking you what you want and start just doing things. And I think that's already underway. I think a technocracy or a expert kind of rule by experts is happening by default. Yes, we have a large administrative state. Yes, we have a lot of regulation. Yes, we have a lot of unelected people telling us what to do. But that can change anytime enough people want to educate themselves and show up and vote. And that's not happening. The most divisive election in my reasonably long lifetime, I'm 56, and the most divisive election in my life, and only 60% of the voters showed up. And most of those people, and I will engage in the both sides criticism here, most of those people really didn't have much of an idea what they were voting on other than personality in both directions. So I'm trying not to leave you with a pessimistic note. I am hopeful that these things can change. Turn the lights on if we could. Thank you. I'm hopeful that these things can change. I think that, I have a great faith in the resilience of American institutions and in Americans themselves. But the only way to gain control of this escalating situation, this increasing crisis, is for people to stop fighting with each other and to spend more time reading and educating themselves. I always leave people with my advice at the end of this is not to, go to college. I think too many people go to college. I'm not sure the experience is all that worth it. That's all you can find out in the book. It's not to get a better internet account or start reading the great books. It's be nicer to each other. Start accepting that experts and lay people both should proceed from a certain amount of goodwill, that we actually care about each other and we want this society to function well. Right now, the hostility in both directions is getting intense. Not just from the lay people toward the experts, that anger toward the elite classes and the expert classes. I can tell you that anger is building in the other direction, where there are experts who simply say, you know what, people don't want to inform themselves about this, the heck with it. Let's not bother, because everything else will run, and I find that just as undemocratic. I don't want either one of those outcomes. All right, let me stop there, and we can spend the rest of the time talking whatever about what you'd like to talk about.
Thank you so much. Just put your hand up. I will come around.
Thanks for an excellent talk. The question I want to bring up is an issue of experts discrediting themselves, which is, well, and we'll start with an example. We learned a few years ago that there are all these military experts. And again, to see both.
Since you have something in your hands, let me do it for you. Expert.
Right. People like former General Barry McCaffrey. And they
right.
Said, yeah, Saddam, he definitely has weapons of mass destruction, and even he's behind 9/11. He was involved in that. And then it came out
McCaffrey
later.
never said that. But
Well,
go ahead.
but others, yeah. And it turned out later on, okay, well, most of these guys were getting paid by different defense contractors. And of course, then obviously, once people find that out, then that discredits experts. And you wonder, and there are of course many cases of experts who are paid by corporations, by the government, by other governments. And so my question is, what do you think of that?
I think that's a serious problem. But before I answer you more generally, let me go back to something specific. No military expert that I knew of anywhere argued that Saddam was involved in 9/11. What I will say is that the Bush administration, I always say the Bush administration on this was like Willy Wonka. For those of you who've seen the old Gene Wilder movie, that, instead of saying, look, we're going to be very clear, Saddam was not involved in 9/11. They said, no, stop, it's not true. Very quiet, like Willy Wonka, no, stop, be careful. They kind of said it under their breath, because what they were really saying is, well, we need to invade Iraq. We have to do this thing. And if you believe that 9/11 was involved, we're not going to work real hard at trying to dissuade you from it, which I thought was wrong. Now, I was one of the experts who said, the guy's acting like he has WMD. There were all kinds of good, logical reasons to no major intelligence agency around the world dissented from that view, and we screwed up. With that, let me add one other thing to it, say that I thought removing Saddam Hussein from power was something we should have been doing a lot of years earlier for humanitarian reasons. But yeah, experts own themselves on that one because they put a stake in the ground, and I think the bigger problem is that because it comes from the world of classified knowledge and secret knowledge, there couldn't be a public vetting of how did we get this wrong, which is always difficult. I don't think, if anything, I think the bigger problem with the WMD issue is that the elected deciders, and in the book I make a very strong distinction between the knowers and the deciders. The elected deciders wanted this outcome. The public wanted this outcome. One of the things I'm going to say about Vietnam and both Gulf Wars, they're really unpopular in retrospect, not at the time. And so I think, like everybody else, experts got swept up in that and said, well, yeah, probably, we don't want to, George Tenet, who I think should have been fired, said slam dunk. Instead he got a medal, which I think would really hurt the cause of experts, because it showed that, that was Bush just saying, that was a kind of a screw you to people criticizing those guys, and it said there was no accountability. I think doctors who are on the payroll to run tests for big corporations, that's asking for it. On the other hand, even those studies have to go through peer review, and they have to be publicized, and they have to get out there, and other experts. I don't think there's anything wrong with pharmaceutical companies funding trials, as long as they accept the reality that sometimes they don't work. And there was just somebody So this last week, there was a guy in the administration who just lost like millions of dollars.
Chris Collins.
Who was it?
Chris Collins.
Collins, not in the right, Congressman Collins, right, New York. And I guess his stock, he owned like a whole bunch of stock in some Australian pharmaceutical company, which you can now take those stock certificates and paper your bathroom with them because that's about all they're worth. Okay, and to his credit, he said, it happens. You take a flyer on something and they find out the drug doesn't work. But yeah, experts cell phone all the time. I think even worse is when experts, Andy Warhol once said, never miss an opportunity to have sex or go on television. And unfortunately, experts cannot let go of that second one. I made that mistake when I was younger. He would say, hey, you want to be on TV? I'm like, sure, I can talk. It was only when I got older that, and this actually happened, it's not in the book, but it's a true story. I had a producer for a major network called me and said, hey, can you come on and do 5 minutes on a certain topic? And I said, no, I can't. I finally just said, as much as I'd love to be on your really cool national show, I just don't know enough about this subject. And she said, come on, it's 5 minutes. And I said, it would be 5 minutes of unbroken ignorance because I don't know anything about what you're asking me. And finally, to her credit, she said, I appreciate you being honest. She said, most people would just say yes. And I think that's when some experts can really get into a big cell phone right there, too. So, yeah, we bear responsibility for that. We take money from people we shouldn't take money from. We, cover our tracks when we ought to be more transparent. We are human beings prone to all of those flaws. I still think overall, the fact that you live in this kind of advanced technological society, primarily at peace, although people are always trying to convince Americans that they're at war with the whole world, we live in a relatively peaceful time, is an achievement of experts. One of the people who was critical of my book literally said, what have experts done for us in the past 50 years? I said, well, if you're going to start from that assumption, then there is no answer to that. But I think, in other words, I'm in heated agreement with your point, but I don't think that's a good reason for dismissing the entire notion of expertise. Okay, he's the microphone guy. Yes, go ahead.
So you mentioned the conflation of like the term fake news. However, there are many that truly believe that, like CNN, for example, are actually maliciously spreading falsehoods to manipulate the public. And my question to you is, how would one engage with these so-called skeptics, with emotional attachments to their beliefs, nonetheless, in a way to actually build trust? And especially if they reject all mainstream media, all corroborated journalism, what exactly would be that first step?
That's an excellent question. Again, the media, especially now that it's been segmented into niches, right? Fox on the right, MSNBC on the left, CNN, the We're at War with Trump channel. I would engage with those skeptics in a couple of ways. First of all, I grant them their point. Yes, CNN, it's not fake news, but is CNN, intentionally, does CNN and the New York Times and other outlets, try to put Trump in a bad light? These are usually Trump supporters that are giving this to you about the liberal media. Yeah, okay. Are the stories false is the question. And if they're false, do they own those stories? Do they retract? Do they correct? Do they have debates about them? Because that's part of the news business. Now, I personally think that, and I wrote a piece in the Washington Post, and I'll tell you the story behind that in a minute, saying everybody should chill out, that, and not every Trump outrage is outrageous, and the media is overreacting to Trump. And I've said on Twitter a zillion times, don't jump at every single thing as if it's unprecedented. Stop using the word unprecedented, for one thing. The other thing, though, I would do with those skeptics, let me tell you the Washington Post story first, which is that the Washington Post and a lot of other newspapers had been getting a lot of things wrong about Trump. He fired all the ambassadors. Well, that happens every January 21st when a president comes in. And I said, you guys gotta, to their credit, the Washington Post contacted me and said, we're a little concerned about the direction we've been going in. We saw your comments on this. Please write a piece, kind of, joining this debate, because we think we need to hear it too. To me, that's a sign of integrity. Saying, we think we're getting some stuff wrong. Come in and tell us where we're wrong. And I think that that's a really important part of it. I've never had to, thump the desk and ask a left-wing media organization to let me in. Almost all the times that I've ever written on this kind of stuff, it's been them reaching out to me saying, we need a course correction, we need to hear a different voice here, which I think speaks well of us. Us, meaning Americans. The way I'd engage with those skeptics is to ask them what they actually read. People say to me, what do you read? I said, how can I stay informed, Mr. Informed Guy? I said, okay, well, I'm an old DC guy. I start every morning, I read the Washington Post. They said, I'm not going to read that. That's the Beltway in conventional wisdom. I said, all right. Well, I like the New York Times, it's got its moments, but New York Times is a great American. They say, that's a bunch of New York liberals. I'm not reading that. Okay, the Wall Street Journal is a conservative, tilting, yet highly regarded. They say, that's a bunch of rich Wall Streeters. I'm not reading that. Finally, I said, what the hell do you read? What do you watch? Well, I'm not watching MSNBC. That's about, I'm not watching Rachel Maddow. Okay, fine. I'm not a big fan of Rachel Maddow either. How about CNN? Anderson Cooper. Okay. Fox? Well, sometimes. Well, they'll watch Fox. But I said, what is it? Where do you get your news? And then what you find is they get their news from scouring the internet. And that starts to mean things like Breitbart and InfoWars and fake websites and just, basically the big parade of shit that's out there. I think I emphasized the wrong thing. The big fake parade of nonsense that's out there, because what they're really doing is they're saying, look, they don't want to be informed, they want to be affirmed. They don't want to learn something. They want ammunition for their arguments, for the expression of their pre-existing beliefs. And I think that's a great way to engage skepticism. Okay, you win. Tell me where you get your news. Cite the top 3 sources of your personal news. If they say Facebook or Twitter, you have a problem right off the bat. And I think then the argument should not be about politics, it should be about why is it that you have no diversity in the places you get your news. Because I think you'll find, when engaging with those skeptics, that their diet is pretty narrow. Their diet of news sources is pretty narrow every day. I always tell people, I'll get to your question in a second, sir. I always tell people to do what I did when I worked in politics. I worked for a Republican senator, so I made sure to subscribe to The Nation and Mother Jones. Just to get a big, slap in the face every day to remind myself that all the people I'm talking to do not agree about everything in the world. And I kept that habit up. I still, they infuriate me, but I read The New Republic, I read Mother Jones. And I dare people to do that. Find one thing that you disagree with and read it consistently. If you can do that, you'll be better off as an informed consumer of news.
As a Russian expert, please speak about the Trump administration and Russia and Putin.
Well, let me start by saying, again, good time to point out that these are my personal views as a scholar of Russian affairs. I don't believe some of the more outrageous conspiracy theories, the tapes and dossiers and all that stuff. Nonetheless, the Trump administration has had one consistent policy. For a guy who's changed his mind on everything 100 times, being nice to Russia has been the only thing he seems to believe in. I think that's because he genuinely admires Putin. I think, I think the president's a bully, and I think he admires bullies. I think there's probably a lot of Russian money that was involved, when Trump was, here in New York City, kind of business Trump was doing, no American banks were going to lend to this guy. So he's probably had a lot of contacts with a lot of Russian money. He'd probably prefer not to have to talk about that. This gets back to tax returns, all that stuff. Now, do I think, he's the Manchurian candidate and he's got a little red phone and he picks it up and Vladimir tells him what to do? No. But I think, I also think that the president, again, my own view is that he just does not comprehend the geopolitical reality of dealing with Russia. Because I don't think he thinks about geopolitics. I don't think he thinks about that stuff. The president's a very transactional guy. It's all about, well, who's up, who's down, what do I get, what do you get, what's the deal? This competition with Russia, this problem with Russia is a much bigger issue than that. The Russians are trying to destroy NATO. The Kremlin, and Putin in particular, is trying to break NATO. There's no doubt about that. My opinion as an expert is that the main thrust of Russian policy is to smear the American political system and destroy NATO. And I think so far, he's getting away with it. Because the president just doesn't want to engage on this. Because there's another problem, and this is just a human problem, a human failing on the president's part. He thinks that granting any legitimacy to Russia being a problem casts doubt on the legitimacy of his win. And I think that that's, on this, I will give him at least 1 ounce of understanding, because I don't believe, you can take this up with me all day long, I've observed local elections, I've participated in them, my mom was a city councilor for a while, I worked in the State House in Massachusetts for 3 years. I mean, I think the president won fair and square. He won the Electoral College, fair and square. You may not like it, but that's the way those were the rules. Everybody knew them going in. And the people who were saying, well, the election was hacked, and the Russians changed the outcome, and the Russians... I can understand why he doesn't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. It's getting tiresome to me. With that said, it's very clear to me that the Russian government attacked the political institutions in the United States of America. They tried to smear our system. They tried to disrupt our politics. They attacked the personal property of one of our major political parties, actually both political parties, and they used this cutout called WikiLeaks that some people still think is an independent source of information that is clearly a wholly owned Russian subsidiary at this point, and they went on a full attack against the democratic institutions of the United States of America, and so far they've paid no price for it.
Trump's general?
Now, with that said, we'll find out in a couple of days whether any of that's going to change when the president talks to Vladimir Putin. He's got a very good Russia... By the way, speaking of experts, as I say in the book, experts don't always get listened to. His Russia expert, the president's Russia expert, is a woman named Fiona Hill. She's very good. And she's no fan of Vladimir Putin. Whether he listens to her or not, or whether she's in the room, is an entirely different question. And a lot of times when people talk about expert failure, what they don't realize is that expert may have lost the policy argument in the room. But, like I said, we'll know more in a few days. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your comments. Good luck with the book.
Thank you.
The prior question leads into the topic that I wanted to raise with you, which is how do America's near competitors, especially Russia and China, deal with their experts? And if American skepticism toward experts is putting America at a disadvantage when dealing with other countries
I think
that
that's
don't have the same skepticism.
I think that's a wonderful point, because I actually think democracies use experts far better than autocratic systems. In autocratic systems, experts give their service because it's demanded of them, and because they're rewarded for it and trained to do it in the service of the state. Now that may sound funny coming from a guy who's paid to teach by the Department of Defense. But I had a life before I worked for the Department of Defense. I also taught for Dartmouth College. I taught for Georgetown University. I taught at LaSalle. I worked for a privately funded think tank in DC. I mean, I did all kinds of other stuff. Whereas a lot of the experts in places like Russia and China, they're identified in high school, they're paid, sent to college, they're sent through graduate school, and they're expected to reflect the priorities of the regime, in part because the regime never changes. Right? One of the reasons we can't do it in America is, who was going to send me to college and buy my expertise in 1980? Jimmy Carter? Things change in democracies, and we encourage our experts to fight with each other. The fact that there are people out there, throwing rocks at me for writing a book from a prestigious press. That's how it's supposed to work. And so I actually think that this constant dismissal of expertise is something that the Russians and the Chinese smirk at. They think, wow, you guys are, thanks for hobbling yourselves in the competition with the rest of us. Because the thing that has made America, and you can tell that I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s, yes, Johnson and Vietnam and all that stuff, but what I also remember was, again, man walking on the moon, Apollo 13, which, I don't look at as a failure, I look at as a great moment of heroism and American know-how. And I think that dismissing all of that now, it does hurt us, and I think the Russians and the Chinese are happy to see it, because it brings our system, slows our system down a little bit when compared to theirs.
You had a question?
Okay. Okay, is a Russian expert.
Oh, we're going to do this in English, all right?
Okay. I would like to ask, about what do you think of comparison this digital revolution and Russian revolution. Let's don't talk about French revolution and other revolutions, but in Russian revolution, as you know, yes, that most ruthless guy got to power and he killed all intellectuals that created it. And now we see the same. We intellectuals, experts, created digital revolution. We gave them tools. We set the ground for that. And now, as soon as they learn how to press buttons, they take the power and they probably won't give back it to us. Probably experts die in the digital revolution, and probably we maybe have to think that they did not kill us, they just killed us in the digital reality.
What a wonderful question this is. You know, that the Russian Revolution killed its intellectuals. Will the digital revolution in the information age kill intellectuals in the West? Is that basically your question? Yeah. I don't think so. I think it's because there are still things that only human beings can do for each other. For example, 15 years ago, there were a lot of people saying to me, you know, you standing there teaching, that's going to go away. Students are going to be kind of plugged in and they're going to not look. Actually, that's going backwards now. We all thought, for example, in college level courses, MOOCs, right? The big massive online courses, just going to take the place of college. Turns out that the way human beings learn is by talking to other human beings, no matter how you do it. And I love that. I think that you know, the digital revolution cannot teach us about Shakespeare. It cannot teach us about the soul. It can't teach us about art. It can't teach us how to construct a good sentence. Even though a computer can recognize grammar, it can't recognize talent. It can't read a work of fiction and decide if it's any good. And so I think, yeah, there are some old school intellectuals that are the equivalent of, you know, the buggy whip manufacturers. And their specialization will pass. Fine. That's the way of the world. But I still think that knowers will have an important role to play. And I actually think what we're going through is a phase. I just don't want a lot of damage done by it until it's over. But I should say that I'm not a technophobe. I actually I was an early adopter of the internet. It came of age when I did. And I love, as those of you among the 90,000+ people who follow me on Twitter can tell you, I'm an active participant in technology and I love it. But I don't worry about artificial intelligence the way, you know, Elon Musk or others do. I don't worry about, I worry about things like automation because it's putting people out of work. We have to figure out what those folks are going to do. But I don't worry about what that's going to do to intellectuals. I still think that teaching, writing, mentoring, all of these are human activities. And I think we actually went through a period of technological optimism about this in the 90s that kind of collapsed when the internet bubble collapsed. Because I think part of the internet bubble was the understanding that there isn't just an app for everything. And I think that we're learning that now. So I'm a little more optimistic than you are, but I think that's just such a wonderful question. I really do. Such a creative question.
I have a few questions, but I don't think I should ask them all.
So we'll give you one to a customer.
Yeah, one per customer. There's a lot of people here.
One. Well.
Do you want to come back to that lady? I'll ask a question.
I'm ready.
Okay.
I heard you say media and podcasts, not podcasts, but
blogs.
Something like, well, that was my second other question, but I wanted to know what you didn't like about blogs. You said they were part of the problem, but this question, look, that's not my question.
Okay.
Okay, so I get my media from NPR and like Redacted Tonight and Intercepted and the Majority Report and stuff like that. So would that be considered like, how do you feel about more independent media?
That's a great question. That is a good question.
To put it in a nutshell.
As opposed to corporate media.
Right.
Well, first of all, I'm a huge fan of NPR, and nonetheless, people, when I say that, people say, but they're liberals. Well, they're mostly liberal, yeah. But I think, again, they try and get it right. What I mostly encourage people to do is not ever rely on one source of information. With that said, I also think you have to ask questions always about who funds independent media, for example. Not opinion journals. I don't care who funds opinion journals. That's why they're opinion journals. But if somebody like The Intercept says, we're news, Omidyar does that. But I think if you identify your job as primarily outing classified material, then I have a question about why you would do that. And I think that, they've had scoops, they have some great writers there, but I personally don't read The Intercept, because I think what they do is just wrong. With that said, if you're going to read The Intercept, read something else. Try to balance your diet with something else. I mean, because I think that this is my kind of complaint about niche independent media. That's why I say no matter what you read, you should read a national newspaper, and then add to it. To me, the independent media are like a additional side course. The main course should be a national newspaper that covers everything. I don't care what it is. The New York Times, The Economist, Times of London, the San Francisco Chronicle. I don't care what it is, but do something that covers the whole parking lot rather than niche media. I will answer your question about blogs. In an era of narcissistic self-obsession, I realized that I was keeping a blog because every now and then I'd sit down and say, well, I have a big thought. And I've come to realize that even as an expert, and I say this especially to younger people who keep blogs, it's okay to have thoughts you don't express. It's really okay to say, I don't need to weigh in on every single thing that happens in the world. Maybe I'll learn something first. And I think blogs, I think this actually has a more important effect on later journalism, because a lot of the journalists that I spoke to, who for obvious reasons had to stay off the record, which was kind of nice for me to be in a situation where they were off the record for a change. They said, a lot of the younger people coming to the profession don't understand that blogging is not journalism. That what they've been doing for years in high school of just kind of, throwing their thoughts onto a screen over and over again is not the same as journalism, which is a craft that has to be learned. And so I think blogs, while I read some of them are very interesting, I still think that it's encouraging this notion that everything I think is important and everything I write down is journalism. And I think I just think that's a bad idea. And so I led the way in that personally by saying my blog is going offline from now on. Nothing gets past me, from me to you without an editor between us. And that's another thing I would always ask about the media you're reading. Is it edited? A student asked me, actually many students, when I had a blog, one conversation with a particular student said, can we quote your blog? Can we cite it in the paper? And I said, no, the editor of that thing is an idiot. He'll publish anything. And of course that was me. And so if it's not edited, it's probably immediately suspect. If only because, not through any ill intent, but because without an editor. I love editors. I'm one of the few writers who can say point blank, I love working with editors because that's a really important quality check on you and your ideas.
Sometimes I wish TYT had an editor because some of the things they say, I'm like, did you really mean that?
Editors are, that's what editors are for. Yes, ma'am.
How long did it take you to do the story? How long did it take you?
How long did it take you to write?
How long did it take me to write this? I wrote the blog post in an evening, and it showed. I then worked on the article version for on and off for about a week, and then I signed the so I had kind of notes. I guess I'm telling you about the blog and the article. So I had a bunch of notes, and I signed the contract with Oxford in the spring of 2015. And so it took me about, from contract to appearance, probably about 2 years. But about a year and a half of that was writing, but at a very inconstant pace, because I have a full-time job and I have a second job at Harvard, and so sometimes all weekend I wrote, other times I you know, my wife can tell you that the creative process is a little weird, that I don't do anything for a week and then suddenly, like, I have to get out of the shower and go, I'm gonna go write something down because it just occurred to me. I'm not one of those guys that, like, I always admired guys like, you know, Robert Parker or Stephen King, get up in the morning and they sit down and they write. I think King's thing is like to write 7 pages a day or something, which is why all of his books are, you know, like this. I can't do that. I write when I can write. So it took me about a year plus.
Hi, so I'm curious about higher education. I'm hopefully going to be an academic one of these days, potentially. We'll see when my advisor lets me.
Don't run. Don't go into an honest line of work, son.
But you know, it's concerning to see. You know, you mentioned Yale already, and I'm sure you've seen what's happening up in Evergreen State College. What can you do as a singular academic or you know, professor or teacher at these universities to sort of fight back against all these things that are happening?
Oh, that's a tough question, because of course right away there are a couple of rules here. What can you do to fight back depends a lot on whether or not you're tenured. Unfortunately. If you're a young assistant professor, my answer to you is keep your head down, publish your book, get your work out, and stay away from all this radioactive nonsense. My personal feeling on this as a teacher is never to compromise. Never to, you know, I say in the book that one of the expressions I really hate is, I learn just as much from my students as they learn from me. No, I don't. And if that's true, you suck as a teacher. And I think that part of this now let's leave Evergreen out of it, because Evergreen's always been like that. They're known for it. But I think with a lot of other schools, part of the client servicing environment has been that students and teachers, since the 60s really, there's been this notion that they're all peers. As I say in the book, you know, these are people that have been calling adults by their first names since they were toddlers, which still annoys me. I mean, just old school. I don't like when a 5-year-old walks up to me and says, "Hi, Tom." I never let my daughter do it, for the record. I still don't. She's 14, and I still don't let her call adults by their first name. And so I think, you know, I think students, I'll say this, because, look, I love my students. I have, you know, middle-aged or 30-ish military guys during the day. But at night, undergraduates, and I've had undergraduates at half a dozen universities. I taught for almost 10 years at an undergraduate institution. I love my students. And I think that they actually respond to the notion, they almost find it better that a teacher walks in the room and says, look, I got this. I know what I'm doing. This is not just a, you know, late-night BSing session. We're doing something important here. We're in a relationship of student and teacher that is important to us both. And I think the professors who walk in and say, well, you know, what do you think? Because your opinion's just as good as mine. I don't think anybody paying for an education wants to hear that. You know, I've often said, when teachers say, well, I learned as much from my students as they learned from me, well, then why are they paying you? So I think the key, when I started teaching, I asked a question something like this to a more experienced teacher. He said, first rule of good teaching is never to hesitate to say the dreaded words, I don't know. On the other hand, you must insist that your classroom operates on your rules, because otherwise there's no point in having a classroom. And I think that's, you know, beyond that, I always tell my students, by the way, at the beginning of every time, I say, don't take it personally, but I don't care about your politics. And it's not that I don't care about you or what you think. I mean, I genuinely don't care which side of the spectrum you're on. I don't care what I care about is the quality of your thinking. Show me how you got to what you think about, because that's what I really want to know about. And I will sit here, you know, and engage with you, but if you're going to, you know, resist that and issue platitudes, whether it's of the right or left, because I've had, you know, I think there is a sense that a lot of this comes from the left wing, but I've had some pretty right-wing students who, you know, won't accept the thing. Then that's a problem. I think professors, teachers in general, should never surrender the autonomy of the classroom to whoever's willing to be the loudest voice in the room. I think that's wrong. That's easy for me to say. Obviously, you know, people come in and chant, and also I'm an old guy. But I will say that I've had a long and successful career of teaching. And I think that the one thing I have learned from my students is that they do respond to a professor who says, look, I know what I'm doing. I understand that your time is valuable. My time is valuable. We're here to do something important together. With that said, don't do that in your first teaching contract. Just stay out of that stuff.
So, as a Russia expert, what's his economy like? How much longer can he keep going if the price of oil stays low? And it bothered me during the campaign that when Ben Carson said he's not so worried about Putin, all he has is one horse economy, he's got oil, the media jumped on him and started talking about, what's he talking about, horses? And Hillary never said that, yeah, he's a strong leader and he's got a horrible economy at the end of 18 years. So
yeah, he doesn't have an economy that's as horrible as the old Soviet Union, but one of the things that I think Putin shares with other authoritarian leaders is that if you put the screws to his regime, he passes the pain on to the people, and then he blames somebody else. So
how much longer can he do that?
That's a great question. I think he can do it for a really long time, as long as he doesn't hurt any of the billionaires around him. Unfortunately, the Russian people have become accustomed to suffering. Now, I was much more optimistic about Russia in the 90s, despite the income inequality and the growth of the robber barons and all that stuff, because I thought that Russians have really had enough of being ruled in that sense. It turns out that there's still the civic culture in Russia is still pretty beat up from 70 years of communist rule and then 10 years of kind of the robber baron behavior. But I think he can do it for a long time. I think the biggest threat to Putin is not the Russian people right now, it's other bad guys. It's other people inside the regime, which is why people like Boris Nemtsov were killed, assassinated. I think Putin, it's interesting because Putin is one of my big professional mistakes. I actually talk about this in the book. That back when Putin came in, I said, this guy might not be so bad. Maybe Russian democracy needs this. Somebody could, because Yeltsin had kind of lost control of all the federal territories, and he was doing things, kind of ad hoc and off the cuff. And I still don't know whether this was all a setup from the beginning, which I'm increasingly starting to think, or whether Putin changed. And I think if Putin changed, it's because he realized that that the only way that he can be safe after doing all the dirty stuff he's done is to stay in power. So I think Putin's going to do everything he can never to leave power, because it's the classic Orwellian problem of riding the tiger from which you dare not dismount, right? I mean, if he steps down, he risks, the public can finally get to him, even though I think he's still fairly popular in Russia, but also that, there's a lot of guys, it's like being a mafia boss. Mafia guys don't retire. Remember what Tony Soprano said toward the end of The Sopranos, people like me end up dead or in jail. I think Putin's decided that's pretty much where he'd be if he weren't president. So he's going to do anything he can do, and if that means making people suffer, then they suffer. If the people around him, I don't even want to say the oligarchs, but if the people in his circle and the privileged class in Russia start to suffer, that's one of the few things I think could restrain a war, by the way. Why won't the Russians ever attack London? Well, because that's where all their children live. I think, the important thing is whether the interest of the capos around the Don are served. And I think he knows that. I think the best way to understand Putin is to leave aside the question of oil, leave aside the question of sanctions. Look at him as a mafia boss, and think about how everything that happens affects him in that constellation of power in the way Mafia Don operates. So you're right, if oil stays low and people are suffering, he's got to figure out some way to get his earners out there, to use a little mafia talk. He's got to find a way to increase his revenue to the people he needs it to be increased to. The public, I think he's shown that he's pretty good at neutering. And also, let me just say, one of the things that frustrates me as someone who would like to see Russia become a freer country is that Russian liberals can never get their act together. So that's another problem, is that Putin's going to be able to stick around a long time because his opposition, Navalny does what he can, and he's a pretty gutsy guy, but the fact of the matter is, the Russian liberals just cannot get along with each other, and they have never been able to put together a united front to deal with this. And I don't see that changing either.
One last?
Hi. So you mentioned before InfoWars, WikiLeaks. You've referenced their, I suppose, growing prominence with the advent of social media. It almost seems like it's their home turf. So what would you say, aside from diversifying reading in the general public and trusting experts more and engaging with experts more, the media experts themselves in the mainstream media, which paradigm should they be using in terms of engaging or combating the real fake news, the real conspiracy theories, the dangerous and poisonous elements out there?
I personally, that's a good question. I personally adopt a dual-pronged approach. When it comes to these guys, I either ignore them or I mock them.
So the Alex Jones, Megyn Kelly thing, you're not...
I would not tune it in. At least insofar as anybody cares what I think on Twitter, which may not be very much, but I said, I thought it was deeply irresponsible of her to do it. I think she played right into his hands. I think that what Megyn Kelly, people said, no, she was tough on him. She pushed him. No, he doesn't care about that. He was given the legitimacy of being spoken to by someone who had once interviewed the President of the United States. And I think that's wrong. I think that the media's approach, that people say, well, we got to talk about him. We got to call him out. These people, like Alex Jones and the people who follow him, are impervious to being called out. Because in a conspiracy theory, no matter how many times you prove it wrong, people just say, well, see, that's more evidence that I'm right. You cannot argue with these folks, and what you have to do is just deprive it of oxygen. I believe in the marketplace of ideas, and I think in the marketplace of ideas, we ought to make Alex Jones a junk stock. And that doesn't mean people like Megyn Kelly putting him on national television. I mean, this guy was a Sandy Hook denier, for Christ's sake. You don't put that on national television. But well, it's an important public issue. No, it isn't. And I think shunning people like this, I think we've become, in some ways, we've become a deeply intolerant society about all the wrong things. We're deeply intolerant of, make the wrong joke, use the wrong pronoun, whatever it is. People go ape. What we ought to be is deeply tolerant of each other's mistakes and shortcomings and human failings and biases and all the other human junk that we carry around. Where we ought to be totally intolerant are the people that are constantly trying to poison the public well. People like Jones and Breitbart. We ought to be completely intolerant of that. And I don't know, am I making myself clear?
I think that's about all the time we have. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out. There are books over here, and feel free to come.
That was a great ending, too.
Thank you.